Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, David Gornoski. Make sure you follow us at David Gornoski on Twitter. Just saw, as we came back, the great Dr. Peter McCullough just followed us on Twitter, so you want to do that as well. Join him in the place where we are changing minds. We are moving the culture forward because a lot of the influencers listen to this broadcast, and you want to be in on the intel drop. And we're going to do that just now with a great friend of the program and a friend of liberty, someone who is a true intellectual, but he's in the space outside of the failing, dying universities. He's in the space outside of that nonsense. You don't want to miss it. It's Professor Michael Rectenwald. He joins us now. How you doing, sir?
I'm great, David. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's great having you back. And I saw that you've been restored to Twitter. Did that happen today? What's the story with that?
Well, that's me being reincarnated in a different Twitter account.
Okay.
I commandeered an account that existed. So there's more than one way to pluck a bird.
I see. So you probably should get your account back. A lot more controversial folks and some of the stuff you've said have already returned on Twitter.
Yeah, I don't understand it. But my original account was not restored. But I'm at Great Reset Prof now, for the time being.
That's great. So at Great Reset Prof, PROF. So you've got a new book out called The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty. We talked about it before. I think it was before it actually came out. It's available now, right?
Oh, yeah. It's available everywhere books are sold and from my website.
So when you talk about it on your website, michaelrectenwald.com, I know you've gotten a lot of interviews about this book. You said you've done like many today, even just today. What is the thing that, because you cover a lot of stuff here, and of course this is timed perfectly with the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos right now, huge spike in sex trafficking going on. These are very debauched, sick people. But Michael Rectenwald, what do you think is the biggest line of interest about your book that you're hearing from other interviewers, from folks who are emailing you and contacting you in response to the book?
Well, I'd say probably the biggest issue is the climate change catastrophism, but a lot of people are very interested also in the population control ethics, as it were, of this regime. And there's a lot of questions about what they have done to implement population control and why they have this concern. So I do address that in the book, and the World Economic Forum is a partner with the UN, and they signed a partnership in 2019. And the UN has been pushing population control since the mid-1950s. And, the World Economic Forum, it grows out of a set of globalist organizations that come out of the Rhodes Society, and that includes, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Council of Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome, and then the WEF is born, and then the Trilateral Commission. Well, almost all of these organizations, especially the Club of Rome, has been about population control. They wrote 2 books on this, at least, Beyond the Limits and The Limits to Growth. In all these books, they're decrying the population as the biggest crisis. And really, the Agenda 2030 of the UN incorporates all of the findings of the population conferences that they held all the way since 1954 up until 1994. And Agenda 2030 is really the pretext and the reason that the WEF got in a partnership with the UN to promote the 2030 Agenda's sustainable development goals. So one way of understanding the Great Reset is this effort on the part of the World Economic Forum and their public-private partners to implement Agenda 2030. Very few people know that the World Economic Forum is really a partner of the UN, and the main issue that they are trying to promote is Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, and population has been a big part of Agenda 2030.
What is the difference between the aims of the Bilderberg Group and the World Economic Forum? Is there a difference? Are they different factions or just different little clubs, different emphases?
They're very similar. In fact, they share not only an ideology and an outlook and the same sort of globalist goals. They also share members. There's a huge overlap in members between all these organizations, and I point this out in the book. I show all these different. I have, in fact, a chart, and I lay out a lot of the members that have overlapping memberships in these various groups, in the Bilderberg Group, in the Club of Rome, in the Council of Foreign Relations, and the UN, etc. So I think it's one globalist cabal, really. And they're all kind of very incestuous. Speaking of their sexual depravity, they're very incestuous. They share members across all these groups.
And do you see I want to know more about the Club of Rome. That one I haven't talked about. Can you explain what the Club of Rome is? Is that some kind of Italian group that gets together to have lasagna?
Well, they are a group that meets in Rome, and they were founded in Rome, and they have met. They're clandestine. They meet, and they meet under the Chatham House rule, which is the rule of secrecy that governs all these groups. The WEF is only slightly less secretive than these other groups. But they meet and they discuss the world's problems and how they aim to fix them. This is what they do. And the Club of Rome, as I said, they wrote two real seminal books. One is called Limits to Growth, and the other is Beyond the Limits. And in these books, they forecast like a coming catastrophe based on population explosion, which they saw as the biggest problem facing the world. So all of this stuff about sustainable development, everybody should know when you hear the phrase sustainability and sustainable development, remember that they're talking partly and in almost primarily about population and the need to reduce it according to them. And we can talk about some of the ways that this has been promoted and what mechanisms they've actually suggested for curbing the population and reducing it.
What are some of those mechanisms that they've suggested? And you're talking about the Club of Rome now or another group?
Club of Rome, all of these groups, like the UN particularly. The UN has promoted forced abortions and forced sterilizations. And people that have been involved with these groups have, like Pearl Ehrlich, who just appeared on 60 Minutes about 3 weeks ago, by the way. He promoted putting sterilants in the water supply and the food supply. This is the kind of things these people have in mind. They think that they need to control our behavior, our consumption, and our population. They see the mass of humanity as a scourge on the planet that needs to be stopped. They look at us like they have their very utopian idea of Eden, their own little Eden, and they see us as encroaching on it. So as such, they actually have suggested such things as putting sterilants in the water and food supply.
Wow. And have they been successful in that, or is that something they're working on?
No, that's just their fantasies. Thank goodness.
Because, Alex Jones talks about the frogs turning gay. I didn't know if that was something that they had already got accomplished in some of the, medications that get in the water.
Well, Alex Jones, by the way, speaking of Twitter, until they let Alex Jones back on, there is really no free speech.
Have you been on Alex Jones's show yet with this book?
He's still not on there.
No, have you been on his show yet to talk about your book?
No, I have not, and I doubt I will be because he has a competing book. So I'm doubting that he'll have me on to talk about a book that competes with his.
You should just make an effort to say, "Hey, I'll promote both of our books while I'm on."
Sure.
That's the problem. Hey, Michael, that's the problem. That's the problem with the Lovers of Liberty. They don't know how to do a little coordination behind the scenes here, like the other guys.
Yeah, that's right. We're not conspiring like they are. So that is true. I think there is something to be said about that. But the difference, I would say, speaking of his book, between his and mine is I source everything. I'm not saying he doesn't, but I understand it's a lot of. It sounds like basically he dictated into his phone, which is fine. But I mean, I tied everything down to sources. I have everything sourced. There's nothing here that is not sourced, and I quote people directly. All of this stuff is very, very tied down and evidence based.
What is the most shocking thing you discovered in the research for this book that you did not know before?
That's a really good question. I would say just how normalized they have made some of their plans and how well they're able to disguise it. What the UN does and what the WEF does, they use a lot of euphemism and doublespeak and altruistic, humanitarian-like rhetoric. But when you really look at it and peel back the onion, you see this is diabolical, man. This is diabolical. These people are wicked. And I don't like to say that very loosely because, I happen not to be the judge. But I got to say they are enemies of humanity.
Why do you say they're diabolical? That's a pretty heavy charge, right? What if they're just bleeding hearts? They just try and care so much.
Well, I think that, if we define evil as something that is against the interests of other people and that you're promoting something against the interests of the majority, and then you disguise it as good, that is even more wicked than just outright attempts to be evil, like like the Dr. Evil character played by what's his name, Mike Myers. This is like hidden, so they're very much able to surreptitiously push through some of these things and put their plans on the table, making them sound like they're actually, altruistic and philanthropic and so on. But all it takes is looking between the lines and looking at the implications of what they say. And then some of the things they say outright, like Schwab said today, just today at the annual meeting, he said basically, we have to create the future. In fact, he said we must shape the future, we must control the future. And he said things like this last meeting, too. He said, the future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community, as you here in this room, quote unquote. And then he also said, we have to reinforce our resilience against a new virus, possibly, or other risks, which we have on the global agenda. As if to say that the risks that are being posed to us are on an agenda that they have. And he says these things straight up. So there's either the guy is trying to make us think that he's diabolical and therefore to sort of elicit conspiracy theories. That's another thing that sort of surprised me. Either they have these slips of the tongue or they mean to make us think that they are conspiring against us. And I think it's the latter, because what they do is they get people generating theories about what they're up to, and then they go on to dub them conspiracy theories, and they disqualify all legitimate criticism of the agenda. It's kind of brilliant. It's preemptive. It's a preemptive strike.
But I mean, like for example, I've seen that clip about Bill Gates at a TED Talks where he says, we want to reduce overpopulation, and one of the tools we have is to have vaccines. And I've heard that was misstated. That wasn't what he was intended, even by people who are big critics of the vaccine and Bill Gates. So isn't there some times where there's so much hate and anger and misinformation and so much mystery and emotion behind so many people's distrust with their own governments and some of the coordinated efforts we've seen in recent years with Ukraine propaganda and COVID propaganda and everything else, climate change, that sometimes we overstate the case if in our zeal to look for how to tie this together, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I've tried to walk a very fine line in this book where I don't overstate the case. In fact, many people have suggested that, these people actually planned the pandemic and unleashed the virus, then the vaccine. I don't go there at all. I suggest that people think that. I record that people think that, and I think it's important to record that for history's sake. So it's a good piece of historiography to record that, but I think it goes too far, and we don't have evidence. So I don't say anything I don't have evidence for. And I have evidence that they have said some very, very, very disconcerting things. As far as Bill Gates' statement, that could be taken two ways. He could be saying that when we have better health, when people are healthier and when they have better standard of living, they have less children. So that's probably what he was getting at. And they said this many times. The UN has said this. When people have better standards of living, they have less children. So let's get them a better standard of living because we don't want them to have children. But the bottom line is they don't want you to have children.
Yeah, they don't like that. I've seen in the Wall Street Journal this week, they had a piece saying central bank digital currencies are coming, whether countries are ready or not. The game-changing development could have a profound impact on the banking system, but few people still understand it. How do you understand these central bank digital currencies?
Well, I mean, they did point to some of the issues in that article, although not very much depth. The central bank digital currency is, of course, a bank account with the Fed in the case of the United States, that everybody's bank account would be with the Fed directly. And this would give the Fed oversight and transparency. You would make your every transaction transparent to the Fed itself, which would mean they have complete surveillance over all spending, savings, and debt. And it could mean that they would direct money to particular players in the market, which they likely would do. And they could cut off players in the market. They could cut people out of the system entirely based on their digital identities, which is another technology that's being pushed through the World Economic Forum. Digital identity, and if your digital identity is not a piece of identification, it is a record of all activity from cradle to grave. So that digital identity could be used to create profiles of people, and that profile could be used to basically ban them from the economy. This is not far-fetched, and I'm not the only one to say it. So, I mean, others have said, and I agree, that this is a tool of totalitarianism, the CBDC. It represents one of the greatest infringements of individual rights imaginable.
Yeah, and we've already seen that the worldview of the major players that own the Federal Reserve, like J.P. Morgan Chase, have a twisted worldview that would be quite disturbing for the average person to come face to face with. I mean, we had on the activist Laura Loomer, who still is not allowed to bank with J.P. Morgan Chase, from what she told me, but yet they were very happy to keep Jeffrey Epstein on their bank account and keep his bank account in their business well after it came out about his heinous crimes against children because he was too good for business, they said. He just really was a great opportunity for business. But Laura Loomer, having political views outside of their preference, is still not allowed to have a bank account with them. So I don't want those folks having, and I guarantee you, people like J.P. Morgan Chase, we're the, J.P. Morgan, we know who founded the Federal Reserve.
Right.
These folks, they don't share the worldview priority that we do. That includes liberal and conservative of goodwill.
That's correct. In fact, it is true that the Fed is run and owned by the commercial bankers. This is not well known. The central banks are really in the control of private hands, of course. It's a private bank. It's not a federal entity at all. It's just called the Federal Reserve, and that's a bit of legerdemain right there. It's a privately held organization that has answers to no one, that its ledgers are open to no one. And imagine them having control over your banking, over your money, having control over your money. There's serious implications there. So, yes, you're right.
So what do you think is the best way to bankrupt these players, these oligarchs that are hanging out at the World Economic Forum and other little groups, thinking about how wonderful it is that they get to rule the world as if it's their property?
Well, I have a 9-point plan for that, and I think we mentioned it before. It's part of what I call the grand refusal. The idea is, regardless of who's the puppet master, the key is to cut the strings of the puppet from yourself. So what we need to do is refuse these elements of this plan. So that means refusing the central bank digital currency, refusing digital identity, withdrawing money from ESG abiding and reporting companies and asset managers who are controlling the economy using the ESG, like BlackRock Inc. and Vanguard Group and State Street and UBS and all that. So also basically refusing the technologies that they would use to control us, like brain cloud interfaces, which in the hands of these people will mean, if Yuval Harari has his way, that will mean the end of free will. Okay, this is what he says quite point blank. And he is an advisor to the World Economic Forum. And speaking of that, the World Economic Forum is not just, an independent, autonomous group. On the board, you have Larry Fink of BlackRock. You have the head of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, etc. All these people are involved.
And again, unfortunately, this is fascism in the sense of big government, big business colluding together to extract resources, privatizing the profit, socializing the loss, and causing chaos as we're supposed to fight to the death over the crumbs on the scraps of their table, right?
Absolutely. And that's where the left and the right could actually combine and unite against the common enemy.
Well, first we gotta be able to get past that seething hatred. So, Professor Michael Rectenwald, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm glad to see you on Twitter, and glad to see your book doing so well, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, available now everywhere, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. MichaelRectenwald.com is his website. Check out The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty. And we'll return in just a moment, so stay tuned. If you want to call in or email us your thoughts on this interview or the one before it, you can do so at 727-587-1040. That's 727-587-1040. Or email us hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. While you're thinking of the website, put your email in, get our weekly update on our content highlight. We have an interview with exclusive sit-down with the great Dr. Robert Malone that'll be out very soon this week. You don't want to miss it. I'm David Gornoski, back in just a moment, but for now, Godspeed.